When you start a project that might take 700 years to finish, you can't just give it your life. You have to find and train the next generation, people who want to give it their lives too.
The first generation at ACIP worked for 30 years to build the foundation. It was something that had never been done before. They had this crazy vision to save all the ancient wisdom of Asia, put it up online, translate millions of pages, and inject the best ideas into the bloodstream of the modern world. I mean, you can't imagine the places they had to go.
If you want to inject some great ideas from the past into modern culture, the first thing that you need to do is to find those ideas. They might be 2,000 years old and in some beautiful ancient book, but rotting in a cave in the Himalayas somewhere. To find the ideas, you gotta find the books, and we went to some crazy places to find them.
I'm Katie Fetch, Director of Global Publishing for Diamond Cutter Press. I'm ACIP's second generation, but I've had a chance to travel to some of the places where the first books were found. I mean, if you took a single great idea that the project has injected into the modern world, and you traced it back, it would take you on a trip around the planet.
Let's look at just one idea, the idea that nothing in the world around us comes from its own side. This was a breakthrough idea back around 25 centuries ago, and it has a lot of applications in the modern world, in business and science. We pulled this idea out of a book called the Diamond Cutter Sutra. The Chinese version is the oldest printed book in the world with a date inside.
I'm Elizabeth van der Pas, ancient Tibetan literature specialist for Asian classics. We found the first Tibetan version of that book, the Diamond Cutter Sutra, 30 years ago. It's a woodblock print that was tucked away in some old dusty boxes in a Mongolian temple in New Jersey, of all places. Then about 5 years later, we found the commentary. It was the greatest Tibetan commentary to the sutra in a warehouse belonging to the Russian Academy of Sciences in St. Petersburg.
Oh man, that was a mess. You have to understand that at that time there was no catalog to the Russian collection, and there were over 140,000 manuscripts. So we brought in a team of 3 people for 14 years to create the catalog so that we could find the books that we were looking for.
That's the first step then. You need to find the books in an ancient temple or old library somewhere, and then you need to create a list or a catalog of what's there. Because oftentimes the people in charge of the temple or library might not even be able to read these ancient languages. That was the challenge we found in Ladakh as well.
I mean, can you imagine these first generation guys hiking past 12,000 feet to get to this little ancient kingdom, discovering 18 different libraries stuffed with ancient books, and toughing it out to make a catalog of thousands of priceless manuscripts. After many years of hard work, the team found 7 different copies of the Diamond Cutter, along with its commentaries. And then they spent about 10 years in the ancient libraries in Mongolia and found even more.
Hey, we can start using our first great idea right away. You gotta understand one thing. If things aren't coming from their own side, then they must be coming from our side. And so if you go looking for great ideas from the past by looking for ancient books, then you aren't really looking for books. Somehow your own mind is creating them just before you find them. But to get how that works, you're gonna have to find more ancient books.
Once we do find some books and make a thorough list of them, we start immediately to preserve them for future generations. My name is Catherine Airhorn, and I'm a database specialist for Asian classics. A lot of the libraries are endangered themselves. The ones in Ladakh, for example, have very old wooden ceilings with heavy Himalayan snows and have been leaking water for centuries. So one of the first things we do is scan or photograph every page of every book that we find.
I'm Nicole Vigna, ancient Sanskrit literature specialist for Asian classics. My second generation team scans these original Sanskrit texts. Our very best scanning center is located in Kerala, India, headed by Dr. N.V. Ramachandran. Over the past 30 years, they've photographed over 3 million pages of Sanskrit. Oftentimes, these old, rare books were scratched into palm leaves long before paper was invented.
If you're fishing for cool new ideas, though, you absolutely have to go one more step after that. As you can see here, the ancient manuscripts are sometimes really unclear and hard to read, which makes it almost impossible with present technology to search them on your computer. So about 30 years ago, the first generation ACIPers made a very brave decision to try to type in all the millions of pages of ancient wisdom so they would be searchable.
Us first generation guys wanted to help poor people at the same time that we were saving ancient texts. So we got this idea that we would train people in different countries and pay them to input the texts for us. The big problem with this idea was that it was going to cost a lot of money.
You have to realize that a project like ACIP in just the first 30 years has cost more than $5 million. The first generation worked as volunteers for decades, but we do have to pay to get access to the collections, to set up the computer centers, to buy the computer equipment, and to pay the input operators. Fundraising in the early years had to be really creative, and the project was frequently broke.
But the first generation kept going, even in the toughest times. I like the story of how ACIP got a major grant from the Hewlett-Packard Foundation to start its first input center in a refugee camp. This happened at Princeton University, where the project first started. David Packard Jr. paid a huge team to type in all of the Greek classics. Our guys wrote a proposal to do the same for the ancient classics of Asia, but they couldn't get into his office. So some brave soul went over to his house and handed the proposal to his wife through the kitchen window. And that's how we got started. Since then, we've built up a strong fundraising department to keep us going for the next 100 years. We still insist that our online library should be free, so we offer our users unlimited access to thousands of ancient books.
But you gotta realize that here at ACIP, we ourselves have been using the ideas we find in these ancient manuscripts. If funds for our project are coming somehow not from their own side, but from our side, then in theory, we can get all the funding we need just by figuring out how things are coming from our side.
You got it, Ben. Our most productive data input centers for the ancient books are in Mongolia and India. These are mainly staffed by village women. They run their own centers under the guidance of our star manager, Mrs. Sonam Plamo. Over the last 30 years, these centers have input over 500,000 pages of woodblock manuscripts.
And of course, to find a single idea in 500,000 pages of text, you're going to need an amazing search program. At the very beginning of the project, 30 years ago, we started to build a special one that works specifically with ancient Asian literature. A well-known computer wizard named Ted Lemon contributed most of the work. The search program, which is called Gopher, could search 500,000 pages in seconds.
We code the data in a special way that allows you to search our database for multiple languages at the same time. For example, simultaneous searches of the Sanskrit-Tibetan versions of the Diamond Cutter Sutra. Most of the input of our Sanskrit books is done by our great team in Varanasi, India, headed by Dr. Santosh Dwivedi.
But again, we've got to talk about the real reason why you find some important idea in the database when you go looking for it. The idea that things aren't coming from their own side is also one thing, and that means it isn't coming from its own side either. And that means, again, that your mind is somehow creating the idea just before your search program finds it in the database. We need to figure out how that happens.
Whoa, slow down, Ben. You haven't even mentioned to people that the whole database is in ancient foreign languages. Maybe our biggest job after we save the books is to get them into modern languages that people can read. So far, our ACIP staff has translated over 10,000 pages into modern languages, like English, Spanish, modern Chinese, and German. And we always put the original language right next to the translation, so people can check our work word by word to make sure that it's accurate.
I'm Wordsmith, ACIP Linguistics. Once you have a lot of books successfully translated, you have enough words to create a dictionary. So my project team is building digital dictionaries in important ancient languages, mainly in Sanskrit, Tibetan, and Chinese.
I'm Betsy Greer, Automated Translation Specialist for Asian Classics. Once we've created these dictionaries, then we develop computer-assisted translation. In the beginning, this was just a time saver for qualified translators. Once we have a database of enough translations, then we move on to artificial intelligence, where the dictionary itself can assist in selecting the right word for the right context. This will accelerate our goal of getting these books out into the world.
I'm still thinking about this idea that things aren't coming from their own side. I mean, this is going to apply to the dictionaries we use too. Whether you find the right word to use in a translation isn't just random. And even with the dictionaries, some people choose words that work better than the words other people choose. Is it possible that your mind creates the word that you choose for your translation the moment before you choose it?
Give it a break, Ben. Once we translate it into a modern language, such as English or Spanish or Chinese, then we translate it into other modern languages. And this applies to the website and the online library as well. If we can make the books and the website available in just these 3 languages, then about half the people of the world can make use of these books. And so we have teams working on translating the library into these and other modern languages as well.
And there's another important part here. Part of ACIP's philosophy since the beginning has been that all of the books in its online library should be available for free, forever, for anyone who wants to use them. My name is Erin Shad, and I'm lead attorney for ACIP. Well, it's harder to give away stuff than you might imagine. As lead attorney, what my department does is to cover all of the legal steps so that the books stay safely in the public domain and any copyrighted materials are properly licensed.
The online library is another huge job that ACIP has tackled. A single Asian classic like the Diamond Cutter is going to have different versions in Sanskrit, Tibetan, Chinese, Mongolian, Korean, Japanese, and maybe even Pali. People who visit our library may want to compare the original palm leaf manuscript to a woodblock print, handwritten versions, or the searchable data. So how do you store all of this in a logical way on the website so that people can easily find what they want? How do you design the digital shelves of your digital library?
This is another job that we've been working on for 30 years. We've taken the 8,000 books that we have so far in the library and put them in sophisticated subject categories, or you could say digital shelves. So then you can go right to the idea that you're interested in and see what people have said about it for the past 2,000 years. So one thing that's important is to decide on the translation of the titles because they've gone through many changes over the centuries. Then we have to translate these names into modern languages to make the books easier to find in the digital library. For example, my project team is halfway through a 10-year project to finalize the titles of the early classics of India.
Come on, guys. You haven't even mentioned one of the biggest problems of all. A lot of these ancient books are just tough stuff from the very beginning, even if they are translated right. And in the West, many were not. Reading some of them is just about as easy as reading an advanced book on physics or mathematics. I mean, just look at this one idea that Ben keeps repeating. Nothing comes from its own side. How are normal people supposed to know what we're talking about?
So then we have to go one step further, and that's where my project team comes in. If you want to inject ancient ideas into the modern world, you have to explain them and how people can use them in their real life. So ACIP's data, because it's free, is used by people and organizations all over the world to do just that. A good example is this modern business book. It uses the ancient ideas from the Diamond Cutter Sutra as strategies for a successful career and personal life. It's been published in over 35 languages and is being used all over the world.
I'm Marit Vasek. I'm the VP of Education for DCI. It's one thing to write a business book about how things are not coming from themselves. Obviously, it's going to help you be successful. But just reading a book is not going to be enough. It's not going to help you make a breakthrough in everything you do. We developed these special seminars where anybody can come and learn about these ancient ideas and how to apply them in their life.
The first generation at ACIP realized many years ago that our goal wasn't to see these ancient classics well preserved but left on a dusty shelf somewhere. These books need to survive in the world because they contain incredible ideas that can help the world now, thousands of years after they were written. So we developed seminars to help people learn and use these ideas, and now we're presenting them in more than 35 cities around the world to more than 20,000 people every year.
And that's really the greatest contribution ACIP has made for the last 30 years. We're finding ancient wisdom in some of the most out-of-the-way places on Earth. We're preserving it carefully, and we're making it available to the world, free, online. But the big thing is we're finding ways to use this wisdom to help the world become a better, more successful place. And those of us in the second ACIP generation will pass it on to the third, and we hope onward until all the work is complete. We estimate it'll take another 700 years, and we could use all the hands we can get. We have lots of project teams all around the world, and we can find a way for you to help. Or if you'd just like to make a donation, here's how to do that.